Before Batman the Animated Series and Christopher Nolan's take on the Batman lore revolutionized the genre in the 90s and 2000s, there was a time when some creators dared to venture into the risky territory. Batman projects back in the 60s and 70s were not always successful, but The Batman is an exception. As a promising live-action project that captured the adventures of the Caped Crusader, with Adam West as Batman, the show had a successful run spanning 120 episodes. And in this video, I'll explore some of the insane behind-the-scenes facts that made the show what it is. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
They come in handy when fighting crime.
CC Batman.
The football player who almost was Batman. When producer Ed Graham first optioned Batman back in 1962, he wasn't even thinking about Adam West. Nope. He actually wanted to turn Batman into a Saturday morning kids show, similar to the George Reeves Superman series. And he had this guy, Mike Henry, a former quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, lined up for the lead role. Can you imagine? A professional football player as the Dark Knight. But CBS was dragging their feet on the whole project. So Mike Henry decided to bounce and go play Tarzan instead. Then ABC came along, saw the potential, and actually got serious about it. They brought in producer William Dozier and writer Lorenzo Semple Jr., and those two basically said, you know what, this needs to be funny. And I'm so glad they did, because a football player's Batman probably wouldn't have become the cultural juggernaut we got. The worst test screening score in ABC history. Before Batman even aired on January 12, 1966, ABC screened the pilot for a test audience, using these specialized knobs that could express approval or disapproval, just to verify the equipment was working. They showed the control group of Mr. Magoo cartoon, and it scored in the normal range. Then Batman came on, and it absolutely tanked. The show got somewhere in the upper 40s rating-wise, which was absolutely catastrophic. For reference, most TV pilots at that time scored in the mid-60s. This was literally the worst test score in ABC's entire history at that point. But here's the thing, the national audience didn't get those test audience vibes. ABC had spent weeks advertising the show. They built up the hype, and when it actually premiered on television, it absolutely exploded. America was ready for campy Batman, even if a random test group wasn't. Lorenzo Semple Jr. wrote the whole thing in Spain. Picture this, it's 1965. Writer Lorenzo Semple Jr. is hanging out in Spain, just living his life, when producer William Dozier reaches out and is like, hey, you want to write a Batman TV show? And Semple, who would go on to write films like The Parallax View and 3 Days of the Condor, said yes. Semple ended up being the creative force behind the whole thing. He wrote the first 4 episodes, then became the executive story editor, and basically established the entire tone and rules for the show. He even wrote the screenplay for the 1966 Batman movie in just 10 days. Also, since he was working from Spain, he never even met the actors during the first season. He was getting no feedback from the network, just creating this masterpiece of comedic Batman content through mail and sheer creative genius. Later in his life, Semple said Batman was actually the best thing he'd ever written, better than those massive films he did. That's how proud he was of what he created. The holy catchphrase came from Tom Swift novels. Alright, so Robin's got all those catchphrases, right? Like holy agility, holy Zorro. There were 352 different holy phrases used throughout the entire series. But where did this genius idea come from? Lorenzo Semple Jr. actually borrowed the concept from Tom Swift novels. There was this elderly character in those books who used a similar expression, and Semple thought it would be perfect for Robin's character. The result was absolutely iconic. And now whenever anyone thinks of Robin from that era, they hear that catchphrase in their head. It's such a simple thing, but it's become one of the most memorable aspects of the show. That's creative genius right there. Cesar Romero's painted mustache situation. Cesar Romero absolutely refused to shave his trademark mustache to play the Joker. Like, he was an established actor with his iconic facial hair, and he was not about to compromise his look for a TV show role. So what did the makeup department do? They just painted over it. They painted over his actual mustache with white face paint. And honestly, it ended up looking creepy and perfect for the Joker character. This wasn't just for the movie either. He did this for every single appearance of the Joker throughout the entire run of the show. The thing that kills me is that most people watching on their relatively low-quality televisions in the 60s probably didn't even notice. But it's one of those behind-the-scenes details that's absolutely hilarious when you actually know about it. Burt Ward's dangerous journey as Robin. Look, stunt work has always been risky, but Burt Ward, who played Robin, had an absolutely brutal time during the production of this show. He's talked about this in interviews over the years, and honestly, it sounds terrifying. There was this one time on when he was doing his first scene with the Batmobile, and a stunt driver was filling in for Adam West. Somehow, his passenger door just flew open while they were driving, and Ward nearly got tossed out of a moving vehicle. Another time, a literal 2x4 flew into his face after an explosion went wrong. He also got burned multiple times from pyrotechnics that didn't go as planned, and he had burns from sparks flying off the back of the Batmobile. This kid was literally putting his body on the line every week for this show, and most of it probably wasn't even supposed to happen. Safety on set back then was basically non-existent compared to today. The Batmobile cost $30,000 and took 3 weeks to build. George Barris, the legendary car customizer, created the Batmobile from a 1955 Lincoln Futura that he'd basically been trying to get rid of. He bought it from Ford for just $1, literally $1. Plus the other valuable consideration, which is the most 1960s phrasing ever. When the show came along, Barris saw an opportunity. He brought in designer Herb Grassi and metalworker Bill Cushenberry, and in just 3 weeks, they completely transformed this car into the iconic Batmobile. The entire conversion cost about $30,000, which back in 1966 was substantial, but honestly not crazy for what it became. The car that they built was actually worth an estimated $125,000 at the time, and Barris kept ownership of it, leasing it to the production. Oh, and here's a fun detail. There were actually 5 different Batmobile cars made for the series because they needed backups and cars for different types of shots. So you've got this incredible vehicle that became almost as iconic as the characters themselves. The Batmobile had parachutes for the bat turn. One of the most iconic moments in Batman episodes is the emergency bat turn where the Batmobile whips around in this gravity-defying maneuver. You know how they did that? They mounted 2 10-foot parachutes on the back of the car. When Batman needed to make that dramatic turn, they deployed the parachutes to slow the vehicle down and help it maneuver. But here's where it gets funny. People watching the show would complain that Batman was littering, dropping parachutes all over Gotham City. So, the production literally had to hire a parachute pickup crew that would follow behind with a van, just to clean up all the parachutes they were jettisoning. I mean, that's attention to detail that's both hilarious and kind of environmentally conscious for the 1960s. The fight scene sound effects were absolutely next level. When Batman and Robin would get into a fight, they didn't just add generic punch sounds. No, the team created 84 different fight scene words that would pop up on screen as visual effects. We're talking pow, bam, kapow, biff, sock, all those iconic words that people associate with the show. They actually had this whole arsenal of sound effects words, including some really creative ones like kersploosh, bonk, and even thwackle. Some of these had variations too, like ouch and oucheth. The first season had these effects overlaid transparently over the action, so you could still see the fight happening behind the words. But starting in season 2, they switched to full screen overlays with solid color backgrounds, probably to save money on the optical effects. Either way, it's become such a signature part of the show that you can't imagine Batman 66 without those pows and bams exploding across your screen. Wayne Manor was Pasadena City Hall for 3 days. The exterior of Wayne Manor looks like this grand, stately mansion, right? Well, it was actually Pasadena City Hall. This beautiful Beaux Arts building from 1928 that's been around forever, located at 380 San Rafael Avenue in Pasadena. The production team filmed all their exterior Wayne Manor shots in just 3 days back in 1965, and they paid the owner at the time, a guy named Mr. Van Valkenburg, $1,650 for the privilege. But here's the clever part. They shot so much footage during those 3 days that they used it as stock footage throughout the entire series. So basically, whenever you see Wayne Manor's exterior, you're looking at the same shots from those 3 days in 1965. They got smart with their budget and just kept reusing the same established shots. The production used multiple studio lots. While Wayne Manor was filmed on location in Pasadena, the actual series was shot at multiple studio lots. The primary filming happened at Culver City Studios, but they also used Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank and 20th Century Fox Studios in Westwood. This gave them different sets and environments to work with. The 1966 Batman movie had additional location shooting at places like Santa Barbara, Rancho Palos Verdes, Griffith Park, and Van Nuys Airport. They were really spreading out across Los Angeles to get all those different looks they needed. But the core of the show, the Batcave and those interior scenes, was all being done at Culver City Studios on elaborate sets that cost serious money to build. The villain sets were filmed at angles because they were crooked. The writers and directors decided that since the villains were all crooked, criminals, they would film their hideouts at angles. It's such a simple visual metaphor, but it actually works. It makes the villain layers feel off-kilter and wrong, which reinforces the idea that these are bad guys operating outside the law. It's the kind of detail that probably flew under most viewers' radar, but if you're paying attention, you notice that something feels off about those villain hideouts, and that's intentional. That's clever filmmaking right there. 3 different actors played Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze was the only villain character to be played by 3 different actors throughout the series. In Season 1, you had George Sanders, an Oscar-winning actor from All About Eve, playing Mr. Freeze. Sanders was basically a Hollywood legend, and Batman was actually his last television appearance ever. He brought this sophisticated, cool villainy to the character. Then in Season 2, Otto Preminger took over the role. Preminger was also a big-name director and actor, but apparently there were tensions on set during his appearances, so they brought in Eli Wallach to finish out Mr. Freeze's Season 2 episodes. 3 different Mr. Freezes. I mean, that's pretty insane. None of the other villains had that kind of casting shuffle. Burgess Meredith's Penguin Quack came from Force Smoking. Burgess Meredith played the Penguin, and he had this iconic squawk and quack sound. You know where that came from? Meredith had actually quit smoking about 20 to 25 years before he got the Batman role. But the show required him to smoke constantly as the Penguin character. That's just what the Penguin did. He smoked. But the cigarette smoke was getting caught in his throat and making him cough, which would ruin takes. So instead of constantly ruining scenes by coughing, Meredith developed the Penguin's distinctive quack quack sound. He basically turned his coughing reflex into a character trait. That's the kind of accidental genius that happened on this show. Plus, Meredith couldn't really walk normally in the Penguin costume with the fat suit, so he waddled. He basically improvised the entire physical comedy of the character, and it became one of the most iconic villain portrayals in television history. Burt Ward made $350 a week in Season 1. In the first season, Burt Ward, who was basically the star of the show alongside Adam West, was making $350 per week. Now, that might sound like decent money for the 1960s, and in some contexts, it was. But this kid was on what became one of the most popular shows in television history. He was doing dangerous stunts, working long hours, and he was making $350 a week. Even accounting for inflation, that's not a fortune. The merchandising and everything else was making millions, but the actor playing Robin was making relatively modest money. The theme song was an earworm masterpiece. Neil Hefti wrote the iconic Batman theme song, and this thing is pure genius. It's built around a guitar hook that sounds like spy film music mixed with surf rock, and it uses a 12-bar blues progression with only 3 chords, until you hit the coda. The famous Batman, Batman part at the end was actually sung by 8 singers, 4 tenors and 4 sopranos, performing as the Ron Hicklin Singers. This is funny, because for years, people thought it was a horn section, but it was actually voices the whole time. One of the singers even jokingly wrote on his sheet music, "Word and music by Neil Hefti," which is hilarious. The theme was so catchy that the Marquettes, the Ventures, and a bunch of other artists recorded their own versions. It became this massive hit, and honestly, you can't hear that theme without immediately thinking of Batman. The show aired twice a week for 2 seasons. In the first 2 seasons, Batman aired on consecutive nights, Wednesdays and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. The format was set up so that each week's 2 episodes told a single story that would end on a cliffhanger on Wednesday, so you'd have to tune in Thursday to see how it was resolved. This was actually a brilliant strategy to keep people coming back, but it was also incredibly demanding on production. They were essentially producing 2 episodes a week for 2 straight seasons. That's 60 episodes in the first season, with all the elaborate sets, stunts, and everything else. The crew and cast must have been absolutely exhausted. Eventually, in the 3rd season, they moved to just 1 episode per week, which was probably a huge relief for everyone involved. Celebrity window cameos were a huge deal, so one of the most fun aspects of the show was that whenever Batman and Robin were climbing up the outside of a building, random celebrities would pop their heads out of windows and greet them. This became this whole thing, where celebrities were basically lining up to get those cameos because appearing on Batman was huge. You had Jerry Lewis, Dick Clark, the Green Hornet, and Kato, Van Williams and Bruce Lee, Sammy Davis Jr., Ed Sullivan Show regular Bill Dana as Jose Jimenez, Werner Klemperer from Hogan's Heroes, Ted Cassidy as Lurch from the Addams Family, Don Ho, Art Linkletter, and even Edward G. Robinson. Frank Sinatra supposedly wanted to be on the show too. There were 14 different window cameos total throughout the series, and they were always these fun, unexpected moments. The cool part is that these scenes were filmed separately and then edited into episodes, so they could film celebrity cameos whenever that celebrity was available. The Bruce Lee and Robin fight never happened the way you think, so Bruce Lee appeared on the show in crossover episodes with the Green Hornet, and there's this whole mythology about a fight between Robin, Burt Ward, and Bruce Lee as Kato. The story goes that the script originally called for Robin to beat Bruce Lee, and Lee was supposedly upset about it, but according to Burt Ward, that's not exactly what happened. Ward and Lee actually knew each other. They lived in the same apartment complex and worked out together. Lee actually taught Ward some martial arts. The script was adjusted to make the fight more of a tie or a draw, and by all accounts, they were friends and had a great time working together. It's one of those stories that gets exaggerated over time, but the truth is probably closer to them being buddies who made the scene work. The show's ratings started strong but quickly declined when Batman premiered in January 1966. It was absolutely massive. During the 2-week period that included its first 4 episodes, the Wednesday episode averaged a 26.2 rating and ranked 9th, while Thursday averaged 26.3 and ranked 8th. This success literally pushed ABC's entire weekly primetime rating up by 2 points. By February, Thursday's Batman episode was at the top of Nielsen ratings in the 30 largest markets with a 28.5 rating. But here's the thing. By the time the second season rolled around in fall 1966, the ratings had already cooled. The show was still doing well. It was still in the top ratings, but the initial explosion of interest was already tapering off. By season 3, even the introduction of Batgirl didn't really revive the ratings the way they hoped. The audience had basically moved on, and ABC eventually canceled the show, which led to this hilarious situation where NBC expressed interest. But then the entire set was bulldozed before NBC could even confirm the commitment. 2 weeks later, NBC tried to pick it up, but the sets were already destroyed, so NBC backed out because rebuilding the entire thing would have been too expensive. The show cost a fortune to produce. The Batman sets were incredibly elaborate. We're talking about a fully functional Batcave with all these incredible gadgets. The Batcave itself, the Commissioner's office, Wayne Manor interiors. All of this was built and maintained at Culver City Studios. According to accounts from the time, the set cost somewhere around $800,000 to build, which in the 1960s was absolutely astronomical. That's why when they demolished it, NBC wasn't willing to rebuild it when they came close to picking up the series. The production was expensive, and while the show was hugely successful in its first season and made merchandise hand over fist, the costs never really came down. It was always an expensive show to produce, which contributed to its eventual cancellation. Adam West was cast after a Nestle Quick commercial. Here's how Adam West actually got the role of Batman. Producer William Dozier saw him doing a commercial. West was performing as a James Bond-like spy character named Captain Q in a Nestle Quick commercial, and Dozier was apparently impressed enough by his comedic timing and delivery to think, that's my Batman. So basically, an innocent milk advertisement led to one of the most iconic casting decisions in television history. West apparently just had that quality that Dozier was looking for, this ability to play deadpan, serious scenes with absolute commitment, while also bringing some comedic sensibility. Frank Sinatra wanted to play the Joker. Frank Sinatra wanted to be on Batman and specifically wanted to play the Joker. However, they ended up giving the Joker role to Cesar Romero instead. I don't know what would have happened if Sinatra had gotten that role, but honestly, Romero's Joker is so iconic and perfect that I can't imagine anyone else doing it. But imagine if Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, had shown up as the Joker on Batman. That would have been a completely different show. Marianne Mobley was the first choice for Batgirl. When they decided to add Batgirl to the show in season 3, they had to cast the role. Marianne Mobley was apparently the first choice to play Barbara Gordon/Batgirl, but ultimately the role went to Yvonne Craig. Craig brought this incredible energy to the character and became iconic in the role. She was a trained dancer and had this athleticism that worked perfectly for Batgirl. Craig was also really proud of the character and became an advocate for women in entertainment. Unfortunately, the addition of Batgirl in season 3 wasn't enough to save the show's ratings, and the series was eventually canceled. The show inspired Lost in Space to become more comedic. When Batman premiered and became this massive hit, it actually influenced how other shows on air were being perceived. Lost in Space was running on CBS, opposite Batman on ABC. And when Batman became such a phenomenon with its campy comedic tone, Lost in Space actually shifted its approach. The show went from being more of a serious sci-fi drama in season 1 to becoming increasingly comedic in seasons 2 and 3, partly because Batman had basically opened the door and shown that audiences were hungry for this kind of entertainment. Both shows eventually got so silly that they lost their audiences, but it's interesting how Batman's massive success basically influenced the entire television landscape of that era. Marvelous Verdict, a show that changed everything. The show was genuinely something special. It took a comic book character and turned him into a cultural phenomenon through a combination of great casting, brilliant writing, inspired production choices, and pure chance. From the painted mustache to the parachute pickups, from celebrity window cameos to 3 different Mr. Freezes, this show was constantly doing something interesting, whether it was intentional or accidental. And even though the ratings dropped off and the show was eventually canceled, it left an indelible mark on television and pop culture that we're still talking about nearly 60 years later. The 1966 Batman series remains one of the most influential superhero adaptations ever made. And honestly, it's still fun to watch today. Do let me know in the comments below what you think of this iconic series. And also tell me which of these facts amazed you the most. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.